the skies, smiling at me.
Frank was born in 1930, the youngest of 7 children in a railway colony called Gangapur in India, where his father worked on the railways. He was affectionately known as Buddy, and is still known as Buddy by his family today. In 1936, Frank and his family relocate to Santa Cruz, Mumbai. The first memories Frank has of Mumbai is the huge aeroplane at the Santa Cruz Aerodrome. That starts his fascination with aircrafts. Frank has fond memories of Santa Cruz and has admitted to falling in love with Juhu Beach the minute he laid eyes on her. As a child, Frank explains that he was a rather fussy eater and that he preferred fish over meat. Mumbai's famous fish pomfret is what he recalls as one of his favourite childhood meals.
As an 8-year-old boy in Mumbai, Frank's mum won 1,000 rupees in a crossword puzzle. He recalled the day she took him to the Crawford market and used the prize money to buy him a bicycle that cost 50 rupees. The loveliest thing is that when Frank speaks about this memory today, he does so with the same excitement he must have had back then. Frank describes this as the best gift he had ever received.
Buddy described himself as a shy youngster who didn't care much for singing, dancing, or performing. Instead, he immersed himself in excelling academically. He enjoyed poetry, physics, and maths, and recalls a poem he grew fond of, William Wordsworth's Daffodils. He also loved the stories from Aesop's fables. In 1947, while India was waking up to her freedom, a young man called Frank Garthwaite was matriculating from St. Xavier's High School, ready to embrace his next chapter. Frank has been a great inspiration to so many of us that love him, and as a young man he was greatly inspired by Sir Isaac Newton. This led him to pursue tertiary studies at St. Xavier's College, Mumbai, majoring in mathematics and physics.
At college he had 2 best friends, Wilfred Sequeira and Joe D'Souza. They often spent weekends together at the cinema, where they watched American and British movies. The movie Beau Guest is Uncle Frank's favourite movie. He has purchased himself the DVD and still watches it.
Frank completed college in 1950 and took up an apprenticeship at Air India, learning aircraft maintenance. He did this for 3 years. In 1953, the economy in India was not doing so well, and there was a lack of jobs and stiff competition. Frank decided to make his move to Britain, as his elder brothers did before him. His mum wrote a letter to family friends in Bournemouth, England, where they offered Frank a home to help him create his new start at the age of 22 in a foreign land as a British subject. Frank was definitely one of the first of his generation to pave the way for the later generations of economic migrants that still make that journey.
The year is 1953, and Frank is settling into life in the UK. He often felt lonely and missed his friends and family back home, but he persevered. He did odd jobs as a semi-skilled mechanic, working all over England. At the time of the coronation of Elizabeth II, Frank remembers working for an airline in Stansted. Frank was very tenacious in ensuring that he established a meaningful and interesting career. He describes how he would spend time at the library looking for vacancies and applying for almost all the options in his field. His idea paid off and he was offered a job in Aldermaston at AWRE, Atomic Weapons Establishment. He started off in a junior position, and while working, he studied in the evenings at the Reading Technical College. Frank speaks with great fondness about his days working there, and what he describes as a very interesting place to work. Frank worked at the AWE for just under 4 decades until he was asked to retire at age 65 and a half, as per law. He retired from the position as a nuclear scientific officer in the year 1995. He said that he would have preferred to stay working, which shows just how much he loved what he did. When describing his working life, he speaks about his 2-hour pub lunch breaks on a Friday and how things have changed in the working world.
In the year 1960, in the city of London, Frank attended a hospital for a minor tropical ailment. While at the hospital, he met someone who he describes as exceptionally beautiful. We can only imagine that this was love at first sight, and our young Frank was no longer the shy schoolboy we described earlier. Frank wooed this beautiful nurse from Sydenham and named Margaret, and she became the love of his life and soulmate. They were engaged in 1961 in Reigate.
Some enchanted evening.
Frank and Margaret were married on the 21st of July 1962 in Sydenham. There were 50 guests in attendance, and they had a lovely wedding lunch following the Catholic ceremony. Frank chose the wedding song Some Enchanted Evening, and Margaret chose the honeymoon in Florence and Rome. They made their wish at the Trevi Fountain by throwing their coins before their new lives began back home in Tadley, England. Margaret and Frank set up their new home in Tadley. Frank recalls how she loved pretty things and she made it a home. It's worth noting that 53 years later, Frank still lives in this home that they started together. She didn't enjoy cooking. However, he is always quick to point out that she made sure he was fed. They always spent birthdays, anniversaries, and special occasions going out for a meal. They were passionate about travel, and they went abroad every year. They also travelled to India every 3 years. Margaret loved the Taj Mahal and hill stations. For Frank, his most notable trip is the Christmas of 1967 in Mumbai. In 1967, Margaret retrained from a nurse to a medical social worker. While doing this, she changed the lives of a Ugandan Asian refugee family forever. The Deer family were blessed to meet Auntie Margaret, who went to great lengths to help a young widow with 5 children. In 1978, sadly Margaret passed on. They were married for 16 years when this tragic event changed Frank's life forever. He loved her and still does. When you hear Frank talk about Margaret, you learn that it is possible to love someone truly and forever. Grieving was a difficult period for Frank and a very painful period for him. He threw himself into work at the atomic weapons establishment.
The village of Tadley was transformed as a 400-bedroom hostel, and hundreds of houses rose on the pine-clad heathland around the site. The cancellation of the Blue Streak and Skybolt missile systems and a moratorium on underground testing between 1965 and 1974 resulted in overcapacity and offered AWRE an opportunity to carry out non-nuclear research whilst retaining its skilled staff. As a result, many interesting developments took place. In medicine, Aldermaston designed replacement hip joints from titanium alloy, a myoelectric artificial arm and hand, and an ankle joint for an artificial foot. Lasers for surgery and renal dialysis techniques were also developed at Aldermaston, whilst the work on blood gas analysis led to the development of the breathalyzer. Artificial eyes were made here too. Carbon fibre disc brake linings and a solar radiation monitor were developed for the supersonic aircraft Concorde. Aldermaston also pioneered developments in computer-aided design and designed a tape recorder which saw service in the British Ariel 3 satellites. In 1987, the name AWRE changed to AWE, and today AWE's principal tasks are to maintain Trident and have a capability to design and manufacture a successor warhead if called upon to do so.
After Frank's retirement in 1995, his interest included current affairs, watching tennis, playing bridge, and travel to warmer climates in the winter months. Frank is tennis obsessed. He's in no doubt that Roger Federer is the greatest of all. He even delves in a bit of court action himself, as seen with his niece Noelle in Perth. He has taken several trips to Perth, Australia to spend time with Noelle and her family, 4 times in total. He is in love with Sri Lanka and says that the beaches remind him of his days in Juhu. Recently, Frank recruited a personal assistant called Alexa, but from what we understand, it didn't really work out, and Alexa remains on probation until she improves her listening skills.
Frank's life lessons. After experiencing the Great Depression, World War II, the typhoid outbreak, the partition of India, a coronation and 4 jubilees, Brexit, and the coronavirus, we asked Frank what he has learned from his 90 years of life. The answer was this: always look on the bright side of life. Grab every opportunity that comes your way. And the secret to happiness is to always make others happy.
To our guide and mentor, Uncle Frank, your life and your story is such an inspiration to us. May you have a wonderful 90th birthday. Happy birthday, love Ravinda and Tashiani dear. And a special thank you to Noelle Udall for sharing her family photos of Buddy.